Hello, everyone. Welcome to Measuring the Score podcast, the podcast where we offer our opinions on film scores and the films they're inspired by. I'm Chris.
And I'm Leslie.
Let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Measuring the Score. I'm Chris.
And I'm Leslie.
This is episode 14, and today we're going to be talking about The Prestige with music by David Julian. It was the 2005 or 2006 Christopher Nolan film. It starred Hugh Jackman, Christian Bale, Michael Caine,
Scarlett
Johansson, Rebecca Hall. And it was about two magicians having a war against each other. But before we talk about that, Leslie, have you been listening to anything other than what we're going to be talking about today?
Not this time.
Not this time.
Back to you, Chris.
It was 2006, by the way. I actually have, because our last episode we did, where we were talking about David Arnold with Independence Day and talking about how he did a lot of the James Bond films. So I started going back and listening to the older James Bond films that he did.
Which were?
The World Was Not Enough, the ones that are on Spotify, and Die Another Day. And when I was listening, they sounded really great. So I'm gonna have to go back and listen to him all the way through. And
yeah, he's well known in England.
Oh yeah, and what I thought was really funny going back, because I mentioned that he did the score to Paul with Simon Pegg and Nick Frost, but he also did the score to Hot Fuzz, which is one of your favorites out of that trio, the Cornetto trio trilogy. And what was really funny about that film was they had a lot of James Bond villains, and even had Timothy Dalton in there. So to have David Arnold do the score, that I thought that was pretty clever right there, because paying a huge homage to James Bond by having him compose the score.
Well, Simon Pegg is a nerd.
Well, yeah. And Edgar Wright was talking about on the commentary that David Arnold told him, he's like, look, yeah, it's nice to have an orchestra for the big action sequences and everything else, but it's also really nice to have a big orchestra for the softer pieces. So like the scene where they're having this really kind of soft moment, even though it was a comedic film, the music that he had in there was really big and swelling, and it worked. It worked. It was brilliant.
Especially when you're sitting in an orchestra setting or a band setting and you've got to play like really soft music.
Right.
You're like in a concert hall that's got bad reverb. It's so hard to try to keep down, especially if you have one of those key instruments that if you're out of tune, you make the whole band sound horrible.
Oh.
Like the French horn.
Oh, yeah. Thankfully, I did not play the French horn. I played the trombone. So if we messed up, it was okay.
No. It's always, trombonists were always the goofballs.
Oh, yeah, we definitely were.
Anytime you messed up, we either knew that it was somebody in the lower brass section. We used to have a tuba player that would walk around and moo in his tuba between songs.
I went in between mine and going, fog.
See?
Yeah.
All of y'all are the same.
And then I also played the Flintstones. Yeah, it was pretty funny.
I need to get you a trombone.
No, I'm not playing trombone ever again. So anyway, something that does not have a trombone in it is the score to The Prestige. Now, like I said before, the film is about two magicians going at it into almost a obsessive war against each other because of a trick that goes bad that kills Hugh Jackman's character's wife. It was a very sad scene, and then Hugh Jackman becomes obsessed with learning Christian Bale's new trick that he has, and it becomes to a point where he's not caring about anyone, including himself. And Nolan was just coming off of Batman Begins when he did this film. And I remember seeing the advertisements for it, and I'm going, so what? It's got real magic in there? This is going to be...
Magic?
Yeah, magic? Is this... really?
Well, yeah, one of the ironic things is that I think one of the fellows in the film was teaching Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale sleight of hand tricks.
Yeah, his name is Ricky Jay.
Yeah.
I've seen him... I'm trying to think of the name of the movie that I saw him in. And he wasn't a magician. It was Boogie Nights. He was
Never seen that one.
It's a movie about the porn industry in the 70s.
I know. Never seen it though.
It was an interesting film. Ricky Jay's character, I remember I think he was a director of photography in the movie. And that was the first time I ever saw that guy. And then I kept seeing him more and more. And then I saw him doing magic one time. And I'm like, so wait, this guy's a magician? Like, seriously? Like a full-on magician? Yeah, he really is. And I think it said something about he's more known for up-close magic, not showmanship magic.
Mind free.
How did I know you were going to bring that up on the podcast?
Chris Angel.
Mind free. It's the Robot Chicken parody of Chris Angel. One of the things right off the bat, as soon as the score started up, it was very minimalistic.
Yeah, that was the first thing I noticed was the fact that it sounded almost like ambient music.
Yeah.
It wasn't loud. It didn't have any pieces that were independent of one another. And when I mean independent, I mean it didn't sound, it didn't, besides loud, it didn't clash. I mean, It was just ambient background music.
Yeah, and there were a couple of moments where the orchestra would come in and it was, it would start getting a little louder than what, was happening before it, and then it would just automatically end. And I'm listening to that. It's kind of jarring at first.
Oh, yes. The transitions were bizarre.
Yeah.
I remember when we were listening to it together, because there was a section of the score we listened to together. And that was one of the things I noticed. I was like, this transition is bizarre. Typically, we listen, or I do, I listen to a score to see if it would stand alone on itself as a piece of music. And listening to this, it just seemed like some of the pieces just ended abruptly.
Right.
And it didn't connect to the next score piece. And I thought that was peculiar and a peculiar choice.
Right. Yeah, and I agree. Listening to it on its own, it's like I said, it's kind of jarring. It's more, like, okay, what was the purpose of that? When I listen to a score, I'm trying to see if it's going to tell a story. And it was like there was a lot of score pieces that were doing this weird transition, and it was like, what kind of story is this telling?
And as I just mentioned, nothing really stood out that seemed substantial. And like maybe it was in the third piece, I noticed a key change. I'm like, I noticed that key change. Sounded like he changed it to minor, and then the rest of it kind of faded in the background while we were driving. And I'm like, well, this is kind of like mood music.
Right. Yeah, it was very mood music. And see, I've made music like this before. So to me, I'm listening to it, I'm like, okay, this is not bad, but there was like almost no themes.
Yeah, and I
listened to it.
Yes, and I listened for the motifs listening to it. But then when we watched a movie, I picked up on it seemed like some few reoccurrent motifs, but they were very subtle.
Right.
But I didn't pick up on it when I listened to the score initially.
I think it was more of a problem of listening to it wasn't like a deluxe version. It was just a retail version of the score. We didn't, seek out like a deluxe or expanded score for this, but yeah, there was
it was very subtle.
It was like almost like a harp or theme. It was the theme of curiosity is what I call it. It's like when the magicians are trying to figure out their next trick. It's almost for the montage scenes, and that was the one theme in the score that kept coming back, and it it gave, like I said, a sense of curiosity. Now, there were a lot of moments listening to it where there were a lot of suspense and tension building score pieces. So I'm listening to it and going, like, okay, what's going to happen? All of a sudden, you get that weird, abrupt transition again. It's like, what is going on?
Yeah, I wouldn't pick this up and listen to it by itself. This is one that I wouldn't just pick up and listen to. Not that I didn't like it, it's because of the weird, abrupt transitions and the fact that it kind of just fades into the background to me, with whatever you're doing. Maybe I would listen to this if I was trying to fall asleep. Because I'm just saying it's real mellow.
It is a very mellow
Not in a bad
score.
way. It's just mellow.
Yeah, it's a very mellow, subtle score. There's no moments in the score where it picks up and it's like a big action cue or anything like that.
The tempo seems pretty consistent too.
Right.
There's like I didn't hear anything that sped up. I think that it pretty much maintained the same tempo throughout the whole score.
Probably. It probably
I'd have to
did.
go back and listen, but my first impression of it was that it's just very melodious, very very quiet, strong, steady tempo throughout the whole piece.
I think there's like one score piece I remember, and it was like a almost like a kick. It was do do do, and it was very subtle when it was coming in too. It wasn't over the top. It was just there to kind of add a little bit more attention to the score piece. And now, to kind of give you a sense of what we're talking about, without listening to it, I do urge you to go and listen to it for yourself, just kind of get an idea of what we're talking about. But to describe it to you, it sounds almost like it's got like a ambient pad, a very mellow, ambient, soft pad playing with some light orchestra strings, probably playing one or two notes at a time, and then moving up or down, depending, and then have some more ambient pads coming in there. And they'll just hold this for a little bit, and then they might change a little bit more, and they might change, and a new instrument might come in there, whereas another one will fade off.
Slight key change. The key changes weren't too grievous. They didn't clash with what was going on.
There was nothing ever over
other
the
than
top.
that minor, that it sounded like a minor key, that change at the very beginning that I heard. I'm like, oh yeah, I noticed that. But it was just really homogeneous. It's the only word that I could use for it.
Okay. Yeah, I think you're about right.
You're like, so, then we had this discussion before we watched the movie. Well, there's got to be a reason why the score was like this. Well, maybe it was just to amp up the moods in the scene. Maybe it was to just complement what was going on in the movie. Because as you mentioned, there are instances where you have written scores that were just really ambient, quiet. The director wanted minimalistic kind of music in the background, and that's what you did.
Yeah. And so, trying to find some background on this and everything else, before we started watching the film, I come across an interview with David Julian from Ain't It Cool News. And one of the things they asked him, was, with a film like this, because it takes place in a certain period, you would think you would hear, like a solo violin coming in there, orchestra
something
big,
very Victorian, maybe opera or some voices.
And he said one of the Christopher Nolan's notes to him was he didn't want a period score. He said the way the film is shot, it is a period setting, but it is not a period film. So that automatically tells you right there, okay, this was a director's choice. Because David Julian is not really known for big orchestral scores. He's really known for minimalistic scores, aside from The Cabin in the Woods. And maybe The Descent Part 1 and 2. But yeah, Cabin in the Woods was a bigger orchestral score. Something I'm, listening to his stuff, it was a little taken back for me. And he said that The Prestige is more like an urban detective story just taking place 100 years ago. So that kind of makes sense. It has like a noir, you know, tension building score for these, two magicians. So right then and there, okay, we've got a reason why he has this type of score.
Wait,
And
in your experience that if there is, when you're working with somebody and they have a notion in their mind, okay, Chris, I want you to think about this key element and write this score this way. You've dealt with people like that were very particular about the sound that they wanted for their score. So you can understand that. So when he filmed it, he must have had this in his mind already that,
right.
okay, this is what I'm going to want for the scene.
Well, David Julian actually had the script right from the start, and he was making up a lot of mock tracks and sending them to Christopher Nolan.
So there was no temp score.
No, David Julian's score, that the mock treatments that he was coming up with, is the temp score. According to this,
very nice.
According to the same interview, it's David said that Christopher Nolan is not really known for using temp scores. So
see, that would be a fresh breath. Fresh air. I'm starting to sound like what's his face off of Home Alone.
Joe Pesci's character.
A breath of fresh air for somebody like you, because you do not like temp scores.
Right. So David said, instead of always hearing, "Can you copy the temp score?" it was, "Can you keep moving the mock-ups in the direction that I want?" So right from the start, he was going in the direction that Nolan wanted. And it was a good collaboration. They knew exactly what they wanted and what the film needed. So when the film started up, it started up with music. Now, again, since this is a minimalistic score, it was very faint. It was very in the background, very in the distance before you started really hearing the score. And it was starting off with Michael Caine's narration.
Correct. And it wasn't overwhelming. That was the first thing I noticed. We've discussed this earlier in the season, the few films that we have watched that had the score at the very beginning. And typically those movies that have the score at the very beginning, they would normally start off with the theme for that score. It's normally loud. It is normally notable. This was a little bit different. So I noticed that it just kind of fell in the background and that it didn't really stand out.
No,
it didn't say, okay, here's the theme. This is setting up the theme, musically for this movie. I didn't hear any of that.
Now, one of the things he said was that he wanted always to have the tension of anticipation, like magic was about to happen. And that's why they had more effects and more electronic, ambient noises rather than having a big orchestra. So, I mean, I thought that was kind of interesting.
It's very innovative, I would think.
It really is.
Because
looking at it from a composer standpoint, if I got this job and they told me this is what we want, immediately my mind would go to period film, so period music.
Yeah.
And I probably would have been fired.
Opera, all opera.
All opera. Yeah.
The fat lady will sing on my score. Soprano.
Wow. That is not where I was going, but okay.
That's period for Victorian.
Now, one of the interesting things that you found was Christian Bale's character's name was Alfred Borden. Alfred Borden. And then you got Hugh Jackman's character.
Choked up talking about
I know.
it.
The opera, it got me going. No, Christian Bale's character is named Alfred Borden. Hugh Jackman's character is named Robert Angier. Abra, as in abracadabra.
It's that's very, very neat.
I thought it was pretty neat. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, and the movies also, or the screenplay, the 3-act screenplay was structured around the 3 elements of the film's illusion: the pledge, the turn, and the prestige. So it was done in 3 parts because this movie is actually based off of a book, Prestige by Christopher Priest.
Right.
Yeah.
And now, we'll get to a spoiler thing in a minute because even though this film is older and everything else, a lot of people may have not have seen it. So we'll when we start to get into spoiler territory, we'll let you know, and you can pause it and go watch the movie and then come back. Now the players the term the prestige also is encompassed in the CD as well. When they were making the CD, they based it around those three key phrases. So this whole
It's
thing,
very structured.
yeah, this whole structure was for the film and the script and the score as well.
And you know, and the themes of the movie as well as the book falls into those categories because you know obsession is one of the themes, and you know we see that throughout the movie. Even watching it, you could see it. It's obvious
Right.
that obsession is one of the main themes.
Now, one of the things I noticed watching the film, to me, the lack of themes actually kind of kept the mood going, kept the story going to me. I don't know if you felt the same way.
See, I have mixed feelings about this score. Um, I think that the movie was strong in itself. It was very strong dialogue wise. It had strong themes. It had strong acting. It was a strong film, and I think that the score was perfect for that fact. You didn't want to overwhelm the story because we've talked about this before that a score could make or break a film.
Right.
I think in this instance, the minimalistic score that they chose for the film um, was good in the way that it did not take away from the story of the film. It did not take away from the dialogue. It did not take away from the action, from the mystery.
Right.
You know, because it's
Well,
based on magic. I think that that was well placed. However, there was a few things I noticed at the beginning of the film that what I would have liked to have seen, but maybe it's because I'm just being me, because I know you don't agree with me. And one of the scenes was at the very beginning where he had the Chinaman was on the stage, which he was based off of a true magician. That was actually that could speak English, but on stage he played as a Chinese man. But I noticed there was a lack of score there, and I would have liked to have heard maybe an Oriental theme or something kind of Asiatic, maybe kind of
well, there was like a little bit of music, but that was more for what was happening on the stage. It was like the music was coming from
yes.
the set.
But I would have liked to have seen it married in with that subtle background, you know,
See, I get what you're
music.
saying, but at the same time, to me, I feel like that would have taken away from the style or the feel that he was, already creating, or that he was already establishing.
I really don't feel that way. I feel like maybe you could have bolstered it just a little bit.
Maybe.
Yeah, especially if it was blended nicely. You
Right.
know, he could have added uh, just a key change, from the Oriental scale or something like that. Add a key change in which it sounded Asiatic, still kept the instruments that he wanted to use because you said he used a lot of the electronic sounds because it was considered modern. I think that he could have made it work for him a little bit better.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, maybe.
But that's just my feeling and my opinion. As we've always said, this is just opinion. And the second thing that I noticed that I was kind of hesitant about was the scene after his wife passed away. Um, I think that the score captured the fact that he was obsessed with what type of knot his fellow uh, magician tied. Um, it built that suspense.
All right. So what happened is Christian Bale's character, uh, he was he was in charge of tying a loose knot for Hugh Jackman's wife
For the water trick.
for the water trick. They were going to lower her into a water tank. Christian Bale ties the knot. She slips out of the knot, gets out of the tank in between while the curtain's down. Well, he ties the wrong knot because they say in an earlier scene that she can get out of this one certain knot Well, she can't. Michael Caine tries to save her, by busting the water tank open with an axe, but ultimately she passes away. And there's a funeral scene in which, Leslie's talking about now, and the music's there, and it captured, because Hugh Jackman's character is asking Christian Bale, what kind of knot did you tie? And Christian Bale's like, I keep asking myself that, and I honestly don't know.
So, and this is the thing. There's two elements to that scene. It was a sorrowful scene because you had the death of his wife that he loved and he cherished, because he kissed her ankle every night before she'd go on stage. And then this confusion. And this confusion on the basis of what type of knot did, Christian Bale's character tie. I think that it did really well picking up on the confusion part. It built that suspense. You could hear it rumbling in the undertone. It was nice for that, but it did not. It did not address the sorrowful part of the funeral, and I think that it could have done a little bit better. Or they could have done a little bit better trying to do that musically, and so that is what I noticed at the very beginning of the movie. So
now that I do kind of agree with you there. There should have been a more sorrowful feel, because if it was there, I did not notice it upon watching the film. Now, as far as listening to the score piece, I really don't remember hearing it in there. But yeah, no, I definitely agree with you on that one, because it captured the confusion perfectly when it got to that. But the sorrowful at the beginning, I didn't
it's
feel
like
like it
it
was there.
totally, completely missed that. And that was a main plot point because that's what set him on that spiral obsession
Right.
path.
Now it was kind of hard for me at first. Watch every time they would talk about, they would mention Christian Bale's character because his name was Alfred, and then you had, who,
Michael Caine.
yeah, Michael Caine, who's Alfred, and Christian Bale was Batman, and he's like, oh Alfred, oh Alfred. I'm like, this is bothering me because you got Wolverine, Batman, Alfred, and Black Widow, and also Rebecca Hall played the Doctor in Iron Man 3. So you got all these different characters from Marvel and DC in here, and I'm like, oh, this is like a superhero,
Reunion.
Hey, how you doing? Oh, pretty good. We're doing magic.
Abracadabra.
I mean, now of course, Scarlett Johansson, I don't think had become Black Widow at that point. Now, Hugh Jackman was known for Wolverine, and Christian Bale, like I said, had just done Batman Begins, and so Michael Caine, of course. And Rebecca Hall, she had not done Iron Man 3 at that point, but it was funny to see all these different actors from all these different, superhero films in there, and I'm like, oh, wow, that's pretty interesting.
Nolan's worked with them before.
Yep.
Now,
one of the things with the score, again, going back to this interview, David Julian says there's a lot of stuff in tracks such as Colorado Springs where in the background there's a shepherd's tone. That's the audio equivalent of an optical illusion, so that it appears to rise constantly. So it's a very nice effect that him and Nolan settled on. So it allowed me to produce a very textural bed to lay under the orchestra. That's pretty interesting.
it is interesting, and I didn't even notice it when I watched that scene. The scene he refers to is of Nikola Tesla. Nikola Tesla, which is kind of based a little bit on real life events because he did do experimentation in Colorado at one point of his career. But Hugh Jackman's character goes to Tesla to figure out the secret of Christian Bale's magic trick, and it took him there. I did not notice it in the scene whatsoever, but maybe it's because I love David Bowie, so.
Now, David Bowie, you found this out. David Bowie turned down the role.
Initially, he turned down the role, and Christopher Nolan personally went to Bowie to ask him to please play this role. He said, I can't see anybody else in it but you, and so he finally agreed.
I thought it was great when Bowie showed up because I'm sitting there watching the film, and you got Hugh Jackman, you got Christian Bale, and then, Michael Caine, and then Andy Serkis is playing Tesla's assistant. And I'm going, okay, who's playing Tesla? And I had no idea it was David Bowie.
I didn't either.
And then out comes David Bowie walking through the Tesla coil, electricity, and I'm going, oh, this is amazing.
Yeah, I had a geek moment when I first saw this movie and saw Bowie, step out as Tesla. And I'm like, oh my God, it's David Bowie.
To me,
it was amazing.
He really looked and sounded exactly like Tesla. I mean, every time I think of Tesla, I think of David Bowie in that role. I mean, it was perfect casting. It really, really was.
Tesla is my favorite scientist. If you start talking about, Einstein versus Tesla, I love Albert Einstein, but I love the free-thinking Tesla.
Right.
Because to me, he was just amazing. He was able to work things out in his mind before he built them. It's wonderful.
So here, now we're getting to the part where I was talking about before, where we're going to get into the spoilers. So if you do not want to be spoiled, you might want to pause the podcast, go watch The Prestige, and then come back. So we're going to get, kind of pause for a moment. And now you're back. So again, if you have not seen the film, don't listen any further. Go pause it, go back and watch it, because seriously, I'm about to ruin everything. So the film keeps going, and the reason why Hugh Jackman's character is there talking to Nicholas Tesla. Can't even get that out.
Nikola Tesla.
There we go. The reason why he's talking to David Bowie is because because apparently he built a machine, or he's under the pretenses that he built a machine for Christian Bale's character, allowing him to transport from one location to another. Tesla's like, yes, I did. Or no, he alludes to the fact that he did. He never outright says that he
built the machine, but the machine didn't do what Hugh Jackman's character thought that it did. Hugh Jackman's character became so obsessed with the idea of the trick that Christian Bale did.
It's called the transported man.
He could not simply acknowledge the fact that he had a double.
Now the trick is his character, Christian Bale's character, would go into the box. He would bounce a ball across the stage. He would go into one box, and then he would pop out another box on the other side of the stage. Now, upon seeing Hugh Jackman's characters, he's like, it's the same person. It's the same person. He's missing the two fingers because Hugh Jackman's character messed up a trick and it blew away 2 fingers off of Christian Bale's character's hand. So he's missing his pinky and the finger and his ring finger because of the trick. So Scarlett Johansson says, "Oh, it's the same character. It's the same person because I've seen where he's hiding the fingers, the missing fingers." So Michael King's character kept telling him he's using a double. He's using a double. He's using a double.
Yeah, he looked at it very simplistically. He's like, look, the only way to do the trick is to use a double. Hugh Jackman did not want to acknowledge that. So he goes to Tesla thinking that Tesla has done some science magic. That's how I'm going to call it. I'm going to call it science magic.
Science magic.
But he's done some science magic and transported him from one point to the other.
So what happens is Tesla builds a machine for Hugh Jackman's character that does not transport him, it clones him. And when the clone appears, it appears in one certain area. Now, when this happens, you find out toward the end, that's when Robert Angier, which is Hugh Jackman's character, has created the real transported man. And every night when the trick would happen, the person that goes up on the stage, the electricity would start, and then right before the big flash, before the cloning process happens, the person standing under the beams would fall under the stage into a water tank, and then the clone appears on the other side of the room and, wows the audience and everything else. That, to me, was kind of terrifying. Think that, oh, well, he has to get up on stage and die every night, and he knows he has to do it. That is kind of, hard to think about.
It's hard to think about, but you'd think that the score would be memorable at that moment.
Yeah.
And
It's still
it's still in the background.
It's still in the background. It's still doing
It's not memorable at all.
But to me, it really adds the tension to what's going on. To me, it does, anyways.
There are scenes where it has added the tension, and I could note it in my notes. But there were scenes that I felt like I would have liked to have heard it a little bit more, and I didn't.
Right. Now, and then that's when Angier, when Borden, Christian Bale's character, wants to figure out what's going on. So he wants to figure out how Robert Angier is creating this. So what he does, he goes under the stage, and that's when Hugh Jackman's character drops into the water tank, and Borden's actually trying to save him. So that's how the film starts off, with Hugh Jackman's character dropping into a water tank, and he can't get out, and
dying,
and Christian Bale's trying to save him. So Borden is becoming, he's going to be hanged for this crime. And then you're slowly figuring out what's happening throughout the whole story. And then that's when you figure out the big secret to Christian Bale's character and to his trick is he has a twin, which Michael Caine said it all along. He had a double.
And they set this up throughout the whole movie.
There's subtle little hints where they're referencing a brother, or like Scarlett Johansson's character calls him Freddie, and then one of them's calling Alfred, and right then and there that you're establishing a duality between the characters.
Yeah, there's a trick that Christian Bale's character did at the beginning, or it was at the beginning of the movie, with his future wife. And I don't know if this was her little boy or a nephew. And so the bird...
It was her nephew.
Was it her nephew?
Mm-hmm.
The bird was in this cage. They smushed the cage down, killing the bird. But you didn't see that in the trick. You just saw the live bird. Little boy picked up on it and still started to cry and say, well, where is his brother?
Right then and
right there, reference to, what foreshadowing to what was going on in the movie. So the first time I watched the movie, I didn't pick up on any of that stuff until I sat down and watched it again for this exercise. And then I started picking up on these subtle nuances like, oh my goodness,
right,
I didn't see this before. Or like the wife saying, well, which one is it today? Oh, you mean it today?
Yeah, and she would ask him, do you love me? He goes, I love you. She goes, no, not today. I can tell it with your eyes. It's not today. It's just when the days you do tell me, it means more to me. And I'm first time watching it, I was going, so this chick's crazy.
Yeah.
and then when you find out that, he's a twin, I was like, whoa, okay.
Makes sense.
That makes sense now.
But the other ironic thing is that their deaths were tied to their wives' deaths. Hugh Jackman's wife drowned. He drowned every night. Christian Bale's wife hung herself eventually, and he eventually
one of the twins was hung. Yeah.
So they were tied to their wives. But we go back to the score. It wasn't really memorable for any of those moments in my mind, and it wasn't memorable at the end either.
It kept its steady, slow, moody, minimalistic score throughout the entire thing. There were a couple moments where it got a little bigger to anticipate, or not anticipate, to build the tension, but it never went above that. Now, one of the interesting things was that Hans Zimmer was credited as the one of the executive music producers. That was because David Julian, this was his first time scoring in Los Angeles. He had always been scoring in London. So he went to Hans Zimmer's studio at Remote Control, and Zimmer was always kind of in the background, kind of, giving him some notes, here throughout. And, but it was really the main focus. It was mainly Nolan and David Julian. And, they were going back and forth on what they wanted. So with this score, it really comes down to what the director wanted and what his vision was and what the film needed.
Yeah.
or what he thought the film needed. And I thought that was great because this is really the first time that we found out, in doing this, what was the drive there, what was the motivation behind this, and that was pretty cool.
I agree.
So, as always, with every score that we do, we break it down to three different criterias. Does it work for the film?
That's a hard one for me today. I feel like 90% it works from the film, other than that one scene that we discussed. I think that because the movie was so strong, you could have had no score in the movie and it still would have been a good movie. So I think for this exercise, I'm going to say yes, it works.
I'm gonna agree with you because, like you were talking about that one scene with the funeral, that kind of I don't know, something could have been done a little bit different for that part right there, but yeah, it really does. It works for the film. It built the mood when it needed to. It built the tension when it needed to, and it never went over the top, kind of hindering the story or the dialogue or the characters. So yeah, it works for the film. Now,
Yeah.
do you have a favorite score piece or scene from the film?
Favorite scene? Tough one. My favorite scene, the score wasn't notable, like it wasn't throughout most of the film. But my favorite scene is when he decides to show Hugh Jackman Tesla's experiment, and you have all of these light bulbs in the snow, and they're all illuminated, and there's no wires connected to them. And
No,
that's my favorite
that
scene.
was pretty cool. Now I do have our favorite score piece. I do not know the name of the piece. It's the scene where Christian Bale's trying to get Hugh Jackman out of the water tank, and he's trying to, and you got that slow, steady kick drum, or slow, steady kick, just just steadily in there, and it's driving the tension, and it's going, and got the swelling of the orchestra and the ambient pads and everything else. I did like that piece. Now overall, it was a fine sounding score to me, but it was again, like we've been saying, it was nothing really notable except for that one right there. That one to me, I did, that one did kind of go a little above and beyond, but not really to me. And that one kind of stood out a little bit. Now, my favorite scene is when Hugh Jackman's character is trying to figure out how the, quote unquote Chinese man is doing his trick. And he's talking about how Christian Bale automatically picked it up that, that is the trick. He's not an old Chinese man. He's a normal person. That is his illusion. But the thing is, Hugh Jackman's trying to figure out how he did the fishbowl trick. So he's got like this bed sheet over him.
Oh yeah, and the fishbowl.
Yeah,
and
he's like, oh, he must be strong as an ox. I kind of like that little scene. It was fun. I mean, I love the film. Don't get me wrong. I love just about every moment of this movie because it still has a great wonderment to it. But that one scene kind of stood out. I was like, yeah, that's pretty cool because he's trying to figure it out. He's trying to work it in his head. How did he do that? And he couldn't get it right.
But even then, at that part of the movie, you could tell he overcomplicated things.
Yep.
And typically, sometimes the simplest explanation is the solution.
Now, the last criteria, what could have been done better?
Well, we've mentioned it before. I think the score piece at the very beginning with the funeral could have been done a little bit differently. It would have kind of amped up the scene a little bit. He could have, he was using ambient music anyway. You can actually make that very sorrowful very easily.
All right.
And moody if you needed to. So I felt like he could have done that, executed it in a way that he could have reflected both of those themes that were going on in that scene at the same time. And then at the very beginning, the Chinaman scene, yeah. I felt like he could have done something just a little bit different to, build up that mood that was going on there.
Right. I agree with you with the funeral part. I think, something could have been done a little bit different there, but overall, it worked for the film. I thought it was great.
It was a
So
good score, yeah.
I really couldn't. I mean, because it was kind of different for us, because a lot of the scores that we've been covering is kind of big over the top, where this one is not.
It's not, yeah.
And so we had to kind of step back and go, well, this is going to be different. This is going to be a little bit difficult to talk about, because it's really one of those scores that is made for the film.
Well, even at the very beginning, you're listening to the score, you know that, okay, there's got to be a reason why this is subtle. And we've watched the movie before. We kind of picked up on the fact that, okay, maybe they wanted the scene to shine more so than the music itself.
Right. And definitely. So what could have been done different other than the funeral thing? Nothing. I mean, to me, nothing could have really been done any different. And I really can't picture a different type of score in here. I mean, if anything, there could have been no score for the majority of the film. So as always, we get to this portion of the podcast. We want to thank you so much for listening. You guys have been amazing, leaving all the reviews and, the comments and everything else. And we try to get to all of them when we can. But life does kind of get in the way a little bit. I want to kind of go Jeff Goldblum there. Life gets in the way.
Oh, you're such a dork. Such a big dork.
You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can listen to us on YouTube, where it's just like a static image and, you hear our voices and everything else. And Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio, wherever else you listen to podcasts. You can find out we're on Deezer now. I don't even know what Deezer is, but yeah, we're on it.
Rhymes with geezer. Sorry.
We're also on Podchaser, Stitcher. Like I said, anywhere you listen to podcasts, I'm pretty sure you can find us. Oh, and Pandora as well. If anybody even listens to Pandora anymore, which I don't think they do.
That's
so
funny.
If you want to, guys, seriously, you got a score for us. You got something you want us to cover. Send us a message.
We're still getting score requests, guys. So when we write season 2 up, we're going to have to weave those into our
because season 1 was pretty much, what we wanted to do. But season 2, we've got some listener requests. So seriously, guys, if you have requests, send them to us. Like I said, you can find us on any social media. Contact us on there. We'll listen to you. We're not going to be mean and turn you away.
We're Southern. We're not mean anyway.
Exactly.
That's just not in our nature.
Nope. Now tune in for our next episode. It is actually episode 15, and it is the season finale of the first season. We're going to be talking, it's our composer showcase. We're going to be talking about Brian Tyler.
Yay!
Pretty much the rock and roll of film scoring. So yeah, it should be a fun episode. So like I said, it's the season finale. And we also got a couple of announcements we're going to make on the season finale. So you don't want to miss that episode. So as always, thank you so much for listening to Measuring the Score. I'm Chris.
And I'm Leslie.
Have a good one.